Hello everyone, in today's video I'm going to be continuing with the AMT 125th scale 83 Camaro project by installing all of the suspension components, painting the body, completing the interior, and seeing how everything fits onto the chassis. Today I'm continuing with the 83 Camaro build. I've been making progress on this project quite a bit recently, with some of the more tedious and challenging portions of the build taken care of, such as wiring and figuring out the position of all the electronics, as well as assembling the drivetrain and suspension components. I can now focus on some of the more laid back and enjoyable portions of the build, such as painting the body and interior. The first thing I wanted to do with regards to the interior was patch up a hole that's between the vents and the instrument panel. It's not going to be very noticeable being on the inside of the car, however it was easy enough to patch up. I started by using a hobby knife to clean up some of the edges, and then used some hobby putty to fill in the hole. After that, I used a sanding stick to remove the mold lines from the steering column. I also needed to do a little bit of sanding on the end so that the steering wheel would fit, and I then glued the steering wheel to the column. Here I'm gluing the gear shift to the center console. Previously, I noticed that the drive shaft was coming into contact with the bottom of the interior tub in this section. To allow enough clearance, I carefully grinded down this area as thin as I could, and now as a result there is no longer any rubbing. I noticed that I needed to do a little sanding on the mirrors to clean up some of the edges. I decided to go with a tan-colored interior to make it stand out more. I wanted to make some very basic interior panels to go on the B-pillars that can be painted to match the rest of the interior, rather than having these sections being the body color, which in this case is black. I thought this would be a little easier than masking off the outside of the car and then painting tan on the inside, and as a result risk getting overspray or messing up the exterior paint. It did take a little time to create these pieces, however after a little bit of trimming they fit well. As you can see, the process was very simple. I started by tracing out the B-pillar onto some paper and then transfer that over to some thin styrene that could easily bend to the shape of the body. I also made a headliner piece as well, even though I don't think it will be very visible, but again it was very simple to make. I used a thicker sheet of styrene to create a couple sun visors. Here's a look at the finished parts. Like I said, I don't think they'll be all that visible, however it's a nice simple detail. I finished them up by spraying a few coats of primer. Moving my attention over to the chassis, as you might recall I did quite a bit of sanding previously to smooth out the lower surface in preparation for painting. Before I painted the chassis, I needed to remove all of the drivetrain parts currently mounted to it. Since I won't be utilizing the magnets on top of the overaxle piece, I went ahead and removed it. I ended up breaking the section where the panhard bar mounts. Although it would have been easy enough just to install a new piece, I decided to instead just fix it with a little glue. A little tip for all the FFR SC1 builders out there, you can help reinforce this section by gluing a M1.6 washer to the outer edge like I'm doing here. With that in place, I was ready to paint all of the chassis parts flat black. I painted these parts outside off camera using some generic spray paint that you could find at any hardware store. I think it was maybe Rust-Oleum or Krylon brand. To paint the body, I'll be using an airbrush with acrylic paint. I started by laying down several coats of primer. I began by spraying it on the inside of the body as well as all the hard to reach areas, and then I applied it to the outside. After allowing the primer to dry, I sanded away all of the dust particles that landed on the body, and then I went over the entire body with some 600 grit sandpaper before rinsing it and allowing it to dry. One thing that I wanted to do before painting was make sure that the chrome mirrors will fit into the mirror housing. I removed each mirror from the parts tree and test fit them. Along with the mirrors, I test fit all of the interior parts. I then began masking off any sections of the interior that I didn't want painted black. Parts of the bottom of the interior tub as well as the bottom of the rear seats will be visible when looking at the underside of the car, so I wanted to make sure that these sections were painted black to blend in. Also, on these cars, some sections of the interior such as the armrests and the dash are black regardless of what the interior color is, so I'll be painting those black as well. I quickly painted all of these parts using an airbrush. With the black paint and the airbrush, I moved on to painting the body. Just like I did with the primer, I started by painting the inside, as well as the hard to reach spots, and then later moved on to painting the outside. I gradually layered on the paint in about 3 or 4 light coats, allowing the paint to dry in between. I'm using acrylic paint, which I like because of the short dry time. When painting a body that will be used for an RC car such as this, I try to strike a balance between making the body look good, but not spending too much time on it since it will inevitably show some wear with use. Using some reference material, I did my best to find a paint color to use for the interior. The best thing that I could find that I had on hand was some Model Masters acrylic number 4601. I noticed that this paint seemed way thicker than what I'm used to with Model Masters acrylics, which could be as a result of age. I needed to use quite a bit of thinner to get it to flow smoothly through the airbrush. I mixed in a little black to darken it up, and I began painting all of the interior parts that I wanted tan. Here's a look at everything I had painted so far. At this point, I'd only applied about 3 or 4 relatively light coats of paint to the body. Before I applied the final wet coat or 2, I wanted to remove all of the dust particles that landed on the body. Unfortunately, the environment that I'm painting in is quite dusty, so it's inevitable that there will be some imperfections with the paint in this regard, but at least I wanted to give myself a clean slate before the final coats. I also went around the entire body with some 1000 grit sandpaper to remove some of the orange peel as well. After the body had been rinsed and was drying, I reinstalled all of the drivetrain components back onto the chassis. The coats of flat black paint that I applied really helps to improve the appearance. Along with the rear end components, I installed the front suspension and steering assembly. This particular assembly is an older prototype, however it should still work well for this car, plus it's easy enough to change out if needed. Finally, I installed the motor and drive shaft. With the paint that I applied to the interior earlier now dry, I wanted to finish building it. The first thing I did was paint the center console black. I paid close attention to the reference image since I noticed that the black section of the console doesn't go all the way down except in the back. I also touched up a few sections on the underside of the interior tub where the masking tape removed some of the paint. Already I was liking how the interior was looking, but I still wanted to add a few more details. The first thing I did was paint the Z28 emblem on the right side of the dash red. I did the best I could with a brush, which didn't turn out looking amazing, but being on the interior, it should look alright. I like how it adds a little bit of color to the dash. I then added some flat black details in a few spots. After that, I glued the steering column to the dash. Once again referring to the reference images, I noticed that the top sections of the doors is black, so I masked off these sections of the interior tub and painted them. This worked very well for the driver's door, however on the passenger side, a little bit of paint snuck past, as well as a large chunk of the tan was pulled off with the tape. It's a little bit of a bummer, but I was able to patch it up pretty well with a little bit of tan paint, though I forgot to darken it like I had previously. Next, I glued on each armrest. Before gluing the seats, I wanted to ensure that the position of the passenger seat would not interfere with the steering servo. After doing this, I glued all of these seats and the dash to the interior tub. I really like how the interior turned out, and I'm glad I went with the tan color. By this time, the body had fully dried, so I gave it a couple wet coats. While the paint was drying, I installed the rear springs, as always cutting them longer than what I think I'll need. After all the weight of everything has been added, I'll cut them down to the length that I want. I then installed the wheels and test fit the body. Unfortunately, I accidentally damaged the left strut while handling the chassis, which will need to be replaced. Everything is looking good at this point. The only thing aside from the broken strut that needs addressed is the position of the body being slightly too far forward. It also almost looks like the chassis may be slightly too long for this body, so I may end up trying a slightly shorter one to see how everything lines up. Like with the Mustang I built previously, I'd like for the ride height of this car to be a bit lower. However, with the interior sitting directly on top of the chassis, this means that the body can't be dropped any lower, and the suspension needs some room to move, so I don't think I'll be able to drop it much lower. However, I've got an idea that might allow me to get to the ride height that I want. Regardless though, I'm really happy with where it's at right now. I've still got some more work to do on the body. Despite my best efforts to get a smooth wet coat, there is still orange peel that I want to polish out. I'll also be painting the lower trim gold and applying the lower decals. I'm also not quite sure how I want to paint the wheels. As cool as chrome or black with a chrome lip would look, I'm also thinking of a gold or bronze center wheel with a chrome lip would look great as well. Of course, I'll also have to cram all of the electronics in as well, but thanks to some planning previously, that process shouldn't be too difficult. I'm already really liking how this car is looking so far, and I can't wait to see this thing all painted and do some driving. To conclude today's video, I want to showcase some of the awesome vehicles and projects that have been showcased in the Make It RC Facebook group. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.